My family has known from the very beginning that homeschooling was what we were going to do, and I spent a number of years researching all my options before I started. But my heart has always gone out to those people who that was not their intention ever to homeschool, and suddenly they found themselves thrust into it either very quickly or even a little more slowly. That's what we're going to be talking about on today's episode of the podcast. Hi everyone, I'm Pam Barnhill, and I have helped thousands of homeschoolers beat burnout, create doable systems, and bring more joy to their homeschool days. Welcome to episode 42 of the 10 Minutes to a Better Homeschool podcast. Well, today's guest on the podcast is Ashlee Williams, and she has a YouTube channel called Grace and Grit. And Ashlee and I are going to be chatting about what happens if you never intended to homeschool in the beginning? What made you get started with it? And what advice do you have for somebody who has kind of unexpectedly been thrust into the whole homeschooling world? And let me tell you, Ashlee has some wonderful advice. Now, if you're listening to this podcast and you are just getting started homeschooling, one of the ways that we can help you is with our free homeschooling planning pages. And you can find those by going to freehomeschoolplanner.com. There are about a dozen pages in the pack, and I will tell you that these are the planning sheets that I use year after year and have for the past 8 years to get the big picture planning of my homeschooling done. So go download those at freehomeschoolplanner.com. And now on with the interview. Ashlee Williams is a God-fearing, fitness-loving homeschooling mom of 4, and she's sharing her family's homeschool journey over at her popular YouTube channel, Grace and Grit. Ashlee, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, we just love the fact that you're here to talk about this topic today of, I never really meant to homeschool, and then it just happened. So tell us a little bit about your family's homeschool journey. What made you decide that you wanted to homeschool?
Okay. Well, for me, there was really no one specific event that took place. It was more a dissatisfaction, if I'm being honest, with a lot of different areas of the public school system. My kids were very young at the time, in first and second grade, and my other two weren't even school aged yet. And so I recognized the fact that if I was already feeling discontented and upset and having scenarios that I didn't really love already, that was probably going to continue and only get worse. So I started to contemplate the idea in my mind, but in my area, homeschooling, especially, almost 10 years ago, was very sparse. I didn't have anyone in my direct life to ask questions to until I met one friend who was a little bit older than me. Her family was a military family. And so while they were abroad in Germany, she had homeschooled her children then out of necessity, and then came back to the States, enrolled them in public school again, and then realized she wanted to go back to homeschooling. So I had the privilege of observing her and how her family did things for about 6 months. And we never really discussed it in length. It wasn't something I was even really open to at the time. It was just more of me silently observing whatever little window she would give me. And that really planted a seed in my heart and in my mind. And I believe God used her to show me just a small glimpse of what could be. And I quickly realized that the things I was questioning, there were answers for. I realized that my children's self-esteem was being affected with their ability to read quickly enough or pass these tests or sit in a desk and not move around. And so all of these things just really started to stir within me. And I wish I could tell you I was obedient right away, but I wasn't. I kind of tried to make a deal with God, and I said, okay, God, if you really want me to do this, I'm going to test it out over the summer. Homeschool mom fail. Number 1, do not try to test out homeschooling with like a short duration of time. And that failed miserably, like you can expect it. My kids were thinking, we're on summer break, we're not doing math problems. And it really made me feel questionable of, could I actually do this? And So I put them into a different school thinking that that might be the answer, and it wasn't. And it just was so loud about 6 weeks into that new school year that is when I finally pulled them, and we've never looked back. So that's the short version.
So really kicking and screaming, when we say you kind of came to homeschooling kicking and screaming, you were really resisting against it.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily that I was resisting against the idea of homeschooling. It was more of a fear of the unknown. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it looked like. I had never seen anybody even really in the online world. And I know moms now listening to this podcast are thinking, you didn't know anybody in the online world? No, 10 years ago, and I'm sure you can testify to this too, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, there were not maybe one or two people that were speaking out about homeschooling. So the environment truly was very, very different, even just in my homeschooling journey, which, like I said, is approaching 10 years. So yeah, there wasn't anyone I could look to. It was a fear of the unknown. I didn't know how to do it, even in the most practical senses. How do you teach a child to read? I did not know. And so it was more of a fear of my inadequacies and a fear of not knowing rather than like being completely against homeschooling.
Right, right. And that is totally understandable. Okay, so you go home for Thanksgiving and you announce to the family, we're going to pull our kids out of school and homeschool. So was there pushback from family and friends when you made this decision?
So my husband and I obviously made the decision together. We made it as, at the time, I feel a lot of homeschooling families do this too. We're going to do this for this year and then reevaluate. That was where we were at. And so my husband and I were in total agreement with it. And as I educated myself more with materials that I found, I would kind of pass those along to him, send him some links, read this book, read this article. And we just really both started to see, okay, this is where God is directing our family. And so even before we announced it to, the grandparents or, whatever, we were pretty solid in our choice. And I do think that that is really important, because if you're feeling kind of, I don't know, in the middle there, easily swayed, then the opinions of others can really affect you, and they can really tear down your self-confidence as a homeschooler before you even have the opportunity to build it up. So we kind of kept it to ourselves at first. And then, we had confirmation from the Lord. So we felt confident in our decision enough. Now, of course, there were reactions like, oh, okay. Or, oh, wow, I would never want to do that. Or, oh yeah, in the younger years, yeah, I mean, it's not that hard, or, those kind of comments. And, they used to affect us a little bit more. Now it's almost laughable, but at the time, some of them did hurt. I would say my toughest reactions came from my friend circle. I was a personal trainer at the time, and I had a very busy personal training business. And so I had developed a lot of relationships with moms who had kids in similar ages as me, and they would drop their kids off at school and then meet me at the gym, and I would give them a good workout. And so their reactions were almost worse than any family members, because, even though I never said public school is terrible, just someone choosing a different choice can make people feel that you're saying that. And that wasn't the case. It just wasn't working for my family anymore. So yeah, I did lose some friends at that decision, not right away, but over the course of a few months. And I definitely got some weird looks, but I think that's par for the course. Yeah. And it's almost like every single person who homeschools goes through that, especially, like I said, almost 10 years ago.
Yeah. And then you make more friends, you make homeschooling friends, and that, that's something that really comes in to kind of help fill the gap in some of those friendships. Well, if you're talking to a mom, and we have a lot of them these days who really never expected to homeschool. This was not the path that they were going to take, and due to circumstances over the past couple of years, they've decided for better or for worse, this is the best choice for their family. What are your tips? What are your best tips or resources for somebody who's just getting started, who didn't have all the years to research? I mean, I spent my children's toddler years researching what I wanted to do. So somebody who doesn't have that, what would you encourage them to do?
So I would encourage them in a few different ways. Number one is trust that the Lord is going to guide you. He's going to cover your family. He's going to lead you to the resources or the mentors that you need. And He is with you every step of the way. It can feel daunting and scary not knowing, but remember that He does. So don't lose sight of the fact of just the blessing that it is to be able to homeschool. So that would be encouragement number one. Everything you do, bring it to the Lord in prayer before you commit to doing anything. My second piece of advice probably is, not the most popular advice, but I'm just saying you can spend hours and hours researching. You can spend 25 years studying the different ideologies that now all have names within the homeschooling community. And while it's wonderful that we have so many resources and we have so many books and we have so many podcasts and we have video creators like myself, too much of that can cloud out and drown out the Holy Spirit that is trying to direct your homeschool and your motherhood. So I say find a few, and by a few, probably on one hand, but don't over inundate yourself with homeschool information because you will quickly overwhelm, and sometimes becoming so overwhelmed can completely, scare you out of the decision you thought you had firmly made. So pick a few to follow for encouragement or, resource sharing or things like that. Number 3, encouragement is understand that you are going to change things, and that's okay. You're not going to get it right the first time, and that's okay. You will be okay. Your kids will be okay. And the most important thing in homeschooling is those relationships with your children. So don't try to replicate the classroom at home. Be open to changing the way that you thought education looked. Be humble enough to realize that maybe the way that you experienced schooling wasn't necessarily the best either. So there's a lot of humility and humbleness involved, but I think if you can approach it with the right heart, it will go much better than if you are, in overwhelmed state, just so much information, thinking you don't know which style you want to choose. Like, just follow the Holy Spirit. He will guide you. All of that is so secondary.
I love it. Such great advice. So very much. So, well, Ashlee, thank you so much for joining us. And can you tell everybody where they can find you online?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. You guys can find me over on YouTube. My YouTube channel is Grace and Grit. There's a wealth of homeschooling information there because, like I said, when I started, I really couldn't find anyone that really resonated with where I was at, city living, homeschooling. I saw a lot of other lifestyles, but I couldn't find anyone that mirrored where I was at. So that's why I started my channel. So you can find me there. I also have a website where I'm not a blogger by any means, but I do sometimes write things out that are just better, put it in the written form versus video. So you can find my website. It is graceandgrit.shop. And of course on Instagram, but I am taking a little bit of a break over there as we start our new homeschool year, but I'll be back.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And there you have it. Now, if you would like links to all of the places that Ashlee mentioned where she was online, you can find them on the show notes for this episode of the podcast, along with any other resources that we have for you. Those are at pambarnhill.com/TMBH42. Now, I will be back again next week. Next week, we're going to be talking all about homeschooling your special needs child. And we have a special guest, Miss Shauna Wingert from Different by Design Learning. Shauna is the author of a number of homeschooling books on homeschooling your child with special needs. So we can't wait to see you again next week. Until then, keep on homeschooling.